And from United Healthcare, with a network of over 120 hospitals and nearly 40,000 physicians across the DC region, United Healthcare is proud to provide the care you need when you need it. That's why United Healthcare has been working to make the healthcare system work better for you, making your care more coordinated, more personal, and easier to access. At United Healthcare, your care is non-negotiable. Learn more at uhc.com/Hopkins/FAQs.
Today on CityCast DC. Wait, did you hear that? What was that noise? Could it be a ghost? Just how haunted is DC? Have you ever had any particularly spooky paranormal experiences here? Okay, me neither. But Katie Kirkpatrick with Nightly Spirit Ghost Tours has, and she's here to share the DC stories that just might have you keeping the lights on tonight. Today's Thursday, October 30th. I'm Bridget Todd, and here's what DC is talking about. So Katie, thank you so much for being here. I'm in kind of a spooky mood. I guess that's my first question. Is the DMV, is it a haunted area?
Oh, it's so very haunted. And there are many reasons for that. I mean, like any city, Washington has experienced a lot. Also, ghosts tend to be drawn to places of power. And so, recognized by the living, what could be more powerful than the seat of the United States,
I love that we're starting out with, you know how ghosts are really attracted to power? Everybody knows that about ghosts.
When you're a ghost tour guide, you start to take certain sort of base facts for granted. So you'll have to forgive me. But, DC's seen death, it's seen tragedy, it's seen drama. And with all of that comes, of course, the ubiquitous presence of ghosts.
So have you heard a lot of stories about hauntings and ghost appearances in your work?
Yes. I've been doing ghost tours for 6 years, and I can tell you the stories I've heard from my own guests. The pictures they've shown me has been incredible. And just in case I need to clarify, I am myself a believer in ghosts.
I was going to ask, where do you fall on that? Have you always believed in ghosts?
I've believed in ghosts for as long as I can remember. I had my first experience when I was 7 years old and I was living in Hawaii. That's where I was born. And I had a sighting of my grandfather when I was 7, and he died the day I was born. So I had never met him. I had no idea what he looked like. All I know is that I woke up one night and there was a man standing at the end of my bed who I did not recognize, and I couldn't scream, I couldn't move. And then once he disappeared, I ran into my parents' bedroom and, they came into my room and looked around, but then they told me, "Oh, honey, this was probably just your imagination or you were dreaming or something." And I was insistent that I saw someone. And then later on, I was in my grandmother's bedroom because she lived with us. And I was looking around at the many photographs she had on her dresser, on her vanity, on the wall. And I saw the man with her in a picture. And I asked her, "Who is that?" And she said, "Oh, honey, that's your grandfather. He died the day that you were born." And I said, "No, I've seen him in my room." And she said, "No, that's impossible." I said, "No, I've seen him in my room." So I don't know that if it's stemming from that incident or maybe I just have a natural inclination, but I've always believed in ghosts and I love ghost stories.
See, I feel like the journalist in me should be pushing back on that story and saying, "Oh, you were dreaming. It was just a night terror, or you saw something in your imagination." I also believe in ghosts, so I believe you. I believe what you saw.
Thank you.
And whenever anybody asks why it is that I believe in ghosts, in movies, the person who is the vocal skeptic, "I don't believe in ghosts. There's no such thing as ghosts." They're always the one who gets it first. So at a very early age, I thought, I'm going to keep my mind open, my heart open. I don't know what's out there. I'm not going to be loudly proclaiming that I don't believe in ghosts if I'm ever in a spooky situation.
Right. There is nothing wrong with being open-minded and curious about it,
What are some of the more haunted places in the DC area?
Well, I think of the ghosts that we tell their stories of in our tour with Nightly Spirits. It's going to be, I think the Stephen Decatur house is maybe one of what I find one of the more interesting. So Stephen Decatur, the Decatur house, for those who are not aware, is on the corner of H and Jackson Place. It is now one of the buildings that's owned by the White House Historical Association. It's also one of the oldest buildings on Lafayette Square. Okay, it was also built by Benjamin Latrobe, who built other structures around Washington. So Stephen Decatur was the youngest person in the history of the U.S. Navy at that time to get the rank of Commodore. He distinguished himself during the Barbary Pirate Wars. And then leading up to the War of 1812, he was kind of involved in an incident, although he was not directly involved in the incident itself, but it was the aftermath that he would get involved in. And that was when an American ship, the USS Chesapeake, was captained by a man named James Barron. It was taken over by a British ship named the HMS Leopard. Now, this was a time when our Navy was very small, and we were really trying to prove ourselves in the high seas as a relatively young country. And the Chesapeake was taken over after just one shot by the Leopard. The crew gave up. James Barron gave up the ship. Now, this was considered an extremely embarrassing incident. And so James Barron ends up being court-martialed when he returns stateside. And of the 9 people that were on the military panel reviewing his case, Stephen Decatur was one of them. And then after James Barron was found guilty and suspended for 5 years, he was charged with cowardice and dereliction of duty. Decatur ends up taking over his own ship, USS Chesapeake. Now, Barron seemed to hold Decatur uniquely responsible for the ruination of his career. And so as Decatur's star kept rising, and he distinguished himself during the War of 1812, taking many ships, burning many British ships. There's lots of paintings that have been painted about his exploits. He is highly rewarded. He becomes a war hero. And he ends up building this home, and he and his wife move in, and they become social figures in the Washington scene. In the meantime, Barron's chip on his shoulder over this incident grows and grows, and then finally he cracks in 1820, and he challenges Decatur to a duel, which Decatur accepts against the wishes of his wife, but it was a matter of manly honor, so he had to do it. Now, dueling was illegal in D.C. already, so they had to go out to Bladensburg, Maryland, where there was still an active dueling range. And so they go out there. It's the morning of March 18th, I believe, 1820. They meet at the dawn. It is foggy. There are seconds because you had to have a second. They're usually a good family friend or a family member there to witness and set the pacings and all those things. So they stand back to back, they take their paces, they turn, and they fire. Now, Decatur didn't really want to kill Barron. You can get away with a duel without actually wanting to kill anyone. Just the fact you were there was enough to clear your honor. But Barron absolutely wanted to kill Decatur, and he shot him in the stomach. And so while Barron would recover from the wound he received from Decatur, which was just in his hip, Decatur was a deadly wound, right? Even today, a gunshot wound to the stomach is normally a death sentence. Back then, absolutely. But he managed to hang on for 2 days. They got him back to the house on the corner of H and Jackson Place. So there he was dying for 2 days. And the neighbors around could hear him screaming because we're talking a stomach wound. And they were trying to get the best surgeons in the city to save his life. It took 2 days for him to die. And then finally, when he died, Susan could barely stay in that house. They'd only been there for 18 months. And so she ended up moving to Georgetown and renting the home to the United States government, who would end up completely taking it over. Now, after Susan moved out and the new staff moved in, it didn't take long for them to start experiencing some paranormal activity in the ways of, the whole household being woken up by screams of pain at night with no apparent source. Blood would appear on the stairwell that they took Decatur's body up to his room with blood dripping down. It would appear on the floor without being able to be removed. They tried to clean it off and it would not be cleaned off. It was like a stain.
Whoa.
And then it would just disappear of its own accord. But here's the thing that I find so interesting is if you go to the Decatur house today and you go to the 8th Street side, you'll see that about half the windows are boarded up. Rather, the shutters are closed. You've got shutters on all the windows, but they're closed on half of them. And it began apparently when Decatur showed up in one of the windows. This is after he died. People who knew him recognized him. Walking down the street, they'd look up and they'd see him staring out the window. And they were so disturbed by this. They told the staff, and so they ended up bricking up the window. But it is now, used for events at night and everything. And I would wonder if the White House historic staff have witnessed anything. because that's the way that's used now. The only time that you see it at night is when there's special events or maybe even occasionally. I think they have weddings there. But the story itself from a historical standpoint is very interesting because of Decatur's legacy. Today, he's, a couple places are named for him. He was one of our first Navy heroes. And unfortunately, he met a very tragic end.
Have you ever had any personal creepy experiences with Decatur House?
So I have actually looked up at the windows that face Jackson Place, and I have seen the outline of figures in dark windows. There's a lot of light around there. Could have been a play of the light. But, of course, knowing what I know, my mind, of course, questions.
Hey, DC. With everything happening in the political world right now, I've got a chance for you to come together and dig deeper. Double Exposure Investigative Film Festival, where investigative journalism meets cutting-edge documentary, is happening Thursday, October 30th through Sunday, November 2nd, right here in DC. This year's lineup explores how truth, trust, and power are being reshaped in real time. There's the U.S. premiere of Eugene Jarecki's Golden Globe-winning deep dive into WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange called The $6 Billion Man, and Cover Up, the new film from Oscar winner Laura Poitras and Emmy winner Mark Obenhaus, along with 23 more film premieres never before seen in Washington. Plus, there's panels and workshops with the journalists and filmmakers behind the films. In a moment when facts and narratives are constantly shifting, Double Exposure is a place to gather and discover, to question and connect. Catch the full lineup and get your tickets at dxfest.com. That's dxfest.com.
And from United Healthcare. At United Healthcare, your access to care is non-negotiable. With a network of more than 120 hospitals and nearly 40,000 physicians across the DC region, United Healthcare is proud to provide you the care you deserve. With open enrollment season here, you can trust that United Healthcare is working to ensure you can access the care you need, when you need, where you need it. Learn more about United Healthcare's commitment to patients at uhc.com/Hopkins/FAQs. And from United Healthcare. At United Healthcare, your access to care is non-negotiable. With a network of more than 120 hospitals and nearly 40,000 physicians across the DC region, United Healthcare is proud to provide you the care you deserve. With open enrollment season here, you can trust that United Healthcare is working to ensure that you can access the care you need, when you need, where you need it. Learn more about United Healthcare's commitment to patients at uhc.com/Hopkins/FAQs.
It's interesting to me. I mean, how many of these spooky ghost stories or ghost encounters in the DC area are also sort of important but maybe forgotten stories from history?
Well, if I could tell you another story, this is maybe one of my favorites. So there is the story of Daniel Sickles and Philip Barton Key. And those who are well-versed in DC history may be familiar with the story, but I think a lot of people are not. And it would actually end up impacting our law system. So it starts with two men. Philip Barton Key, who, by the way, was the son of Francis Scott Key, which that name may be familiar to people, and Daniel Sickles. And they were friends. We're talking about 1850s. This is before the Civil War. And Dan Sickles was a New York senator. Philip Barton Key was a lawyer. When they get married, both of them get married to different women. Dan Sickles, he marries a woman named Teresa, who is from New York society. She's very young. She doesn't know anyone in D.C. So she comes down to join her husband because, of course, his career was in Washington as a congressman. Philip Barton Key also marries, but unfortunately, he loses his wife early on. So Dan Sickles' political star was rising. He was he had friends in the Buchanan administration, and Buchanan invites him to come on a trip to London. Sickles accepts, but the problem was his wife was pregnant at this point, and she could not travel. She also didn't know anyone, and back in these days, proper ladies did not go out without escorts. You needed to typically have a male escort with you, which would normally be your husband or would be a family member. So who would watch over her? Now, the exception to that rule were widowers, and here, Dan Sickles' best friend, Philip Barton Key, was a widower. So he asks Key to watch over his wife while he is gone in London. So he goes away. And everyone sees Philip Barton Key and Teresa Sickles walking around, but nobody thinks anything of it. They all know Philip Barton Key is a widower and that Teresa's husband is off abroad and that they were friends. So no one thought anything. Well, this friendship turned into something a little more, and they began an affair that was, even though they tried to be as subtle about it as they could, the whole city knew, right? Washington is a small place. Even today, it's kind of a small place. People know each other's business.
Oh, yeah.
And so everybody knew, and they're like, okay, all right. But, then Sickles returns. And only about 2 days or so after he returns, right, soon after he gets back, someone slips a poison pen letter. A poison pen letter was a thing. It was a basically an anonymous note meant to stir up trouble. That's why they call it a poison pen letter. And it lays out the whole thing. Like they had a system where she would hang a certain color ribbon out the window to note, was she alone? Was she not alone? Kinds of things. And laid out the whole thing. And so Dan Sickles reads this and he confronts his wife and she admits it. He locks her into a room. And then in a rage, he stomps over to a building on Lafayette Square that was called the City Club or the Washington Club. It was a gentleman's club, not that kind of gentleman's club, but it was a club where men of means, men of the world would meet and smoke cigars and drink and everything and be in the company of other powerful men. So he goes there with another friend and he's just fuming. He can't believe that he was betrayed by his best friend and his wife. Then he sees Philip Barton Key crossing Lafayette Square. And Philip Barton Key is none the wiser. He has no idea that Sickles is even back, and it definitely doesn't know that he knows. And so then Sickles leaves the club. He's got 2 guns in hand. He approaches Key and he says something along the lines of, "You have dishonored my marriage. You have, besmirched my house, my bed. You must die." And he shoots him in the chest multiple times. Key, in the meantime, when he sees Sickles advancing, he knows exactly what's happened. He puts 2 and 2 together very fast, and he starts to yell, "Murder, murder, murder," as Sickles is advancing on him. And then he gets shot. People come out of the club. They grab Key's body and bring him into the club, but there he dies not long after that, right? So he dies in the club. Sickles is arrested. There were plenty of witnesses, right? This is obviously a crime of passion. This was, murder. But then during his trial, he uses a letter that he made his wife write, confessing to everything. And also, he uses the defense of temporary insanity. And believe it or not, he gets acquitted. And this is the first time that the defense of temporary insanity was ever used in a murder trial successfully.
Wow.
And that set the precedent. And so now it is part of a defense, like it is a tool that can be used by defense for murder trials. Sickles ends up getting released, of course, then. He's acquitted. And he becomes a figure in the Civil War. He he fights for the Union, then apparently the Confederacy, then goes back, and then he loses a leg in Gettysburg. And after that, he actually travels. He makes money by traveling and telling war stories with his leg, which that leg is held by the Maryland Medical Military Museum. And so you can actually see Sickles' leg. But to get to the ghost part, because this is just some background for you. That same building that had been used by the club was bought by William Seward, who was Lincoln's Secretary of State. Throughout the war, Seward and Lincoln would meet up, of course. That was why Seward bought the club. It was right there, right by the White House, so he wanted to be close. Now, on the night of April 14th, 1865, the night that Lincoln was assassinated, John Wilkes Booth wasn't the only assassin. There were others that were involved in this conspiracy. And a man named Lewis Powell was supposed to assassinate William Seward. And so he goes to the Seward house, formerly the club, and gets in. He manages to disarm and he knocks out the doorman. He gets up to the 2nd floor where Seward is convalescing from a carriage accident. His family members are on the 1st floor. They're none the wiser. And then all of a sudden they hear someone start to yell, "Murder, murder, murder," from upstairs. So they run up They see Lewis Powell in the midst of trying to stab Seward to death. Seward, in the meantime, is rolled out of the bed. He's got his back to Powell, trying to protect himself while Powell is trying to stab him to death. His family members apprehend him. And then when this is all, they manage to save Seward's life. Okay. And so then later Seward asked them, how did you know to come up? Because he hadn't screamed. He hadn't said anything. And they said, well, we heard you yell, murder, murder, murder. And he said, oh, I didn't say anything. I was so shocked I didn't get a word out. And so he came to believe, and it was generally believed, that Key, who had died in that home, actually just about 7 years prior, what happened with Sickles and Key was in the 1850s. The war was 1861 to 1865, right? So this wasn't too long after. That duel or that trial was well in public memory still. Seward believed that Key's ghost alerted his family to prevent another tragedy from happening. And so this story, I think, is just so fascinating on so many levels. I mean, from the lead up with what happened with Key and Sickles to then Seward using the place as his home and then surviving this attack. So that's actually one of the more interesting stories that I don't think many people know why we allow temporary insanity as a murder defense, but that is why.
And I think, not only is it an interesting story from a historical perspective of why that shapes kind of how our world today, it's also just a reminder of how messy and dramatic people were back in the day. I think we think of, Real Housewives on TV of being dramatic. These folks were also very dramatic and had lots of juicy, messy stuff going on. I'll put it that way.
So much. Oh my gosh. Humanity is humanity,
That's a really good way to put it. What are some of the most shocking or scariest or craziest paranormal experiences that you've had on one of your tours in the DC area?
Well, I'm going to turn to Alexandria, actually, because we also have a tour in Alexandria. And there is one spot on the tour that we ask people to stop and take pictures. The reason why is about 95% of the time, something shows up. So we actually do have, and I have a collection of these pictures too. I always ask my guests to send me a copy because I collect them. Because just in case we get one group where no one sees anything for whatever reason, I have some evidence to show people, like, why do we stop here? So I'll tell you the story of the Carlisle House Historical Park. The Carlisle House was built in 1752. It's on North Fairfax Street. It's currently a museum. And there's a green space in front of it, and it looks like that side of the house is the front of the house, but it's not actually. That was originally the back of the house. The green space in front of it, there used to be another building there. And you can see in the building that is just south of the park, there are markings where you could see another building had been. Now, what that building was the Braddock House Hotel or Greens Hotel. There were a few different names for it. And that building had been used by the Union Army during the Civil War when they occupied Alexandria. It was a military hospital. Now, there are places that tend to attract paranormal activity, and those are places that experience huge concentrations of death. That includes battlefields, prisons, orphanages, asylums, concentration camps. These are places where the death is just, there's so much, it's so soaked into the ground that even with the passage of time, the dead return because they are generally unsettled. In the case of the Braddock House Hotel, that's absolutely true. It had 700 beds. That wasn't enough. There were so many wounded soldiers being brought in on a daily basis as the war raged on. And there weren't even enough beds. And so you would have soldiers littering on the floor, like their wounds festering. They had fevers. It was awful. It was a horrible place to be. Sometimes they would even try to end their suffering in a quick and painless way by throwing themselves out windows, which I know is very gruesome. But that was the reality. Now, after the war ended and the building went back to being a hotel, it was never the same again. It was never a successful business again. The hotel closed soon after the war, after it reopened, because the place was always cold. Guests would be woken up by the sounds of screams of pain at night. Like, it was just, there was an eerie feeling about the whole place. And over time, it was many other businesses. I think at one point I read that it was a bank, it was a grocery store, it was even a car dealership, but nothing survived there for very long. And so Finally, when the city of Alexandria starts to build up the idea of a historic old town, they purchase older properties for either restoring them, tearing them down. There are lots of different projects going on. So that building was purchased by the Carlisle House, was bought and renovated and restored, and now it's a museum. The Braddock House Hotel building was just a decrepit, sad-looking heap of bricks. So the city bought it, tore it down, and just extended the property of the Carlisle House. But just because you remove the structure of the home or the building does not mean that you remove all of the residue of that pain and suffering that was inside of it. And so when we have our guests come there and I tell them this story, at that point I ask them to take out their phones. By then it's dark. We give these tours at night. And we ask them to take pictures of the lawn, just the lawn, like the grass or the wall of the building next door or anything like that. I just don't focus on anything, but try to hold your camera still. And 98% of the time, people find orbs in their pictures. And if you don't know what an orb is, it's basically just a ball of light. And they tend to be blue in this case. And they're always in different places, different kinds of phones too. Doesn't matter what brand of phone you have. But 98% of the time, someone sees something. And so we do seem to have this concentration of activity happening in that particular space, and it results in orbs showing up in people's cameras. And there are things that cameras pick up that the human eye does not. So that's actually not unusual. But like the fact that there's so much differentiation in where these orbs show up, that it's not like a trick of the light, right? This is not some sort of weird, we have lanterns around. I tell people to avoid those, but there's something happening there. So the thought that we're standing in Carlisle House Park and that there's basically dead soldiers all around us is kind of unnerving.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say, and yeah. I'm sure there is someone listening who says, Katie, Bridget, you all are believers. You believe in ghosts. I don't believe in any of this. Those are just tricks of the light. If you were trying to convince someone like that to be a believer and you could only send them to one place in the DMV area to change their mind, where would it be?
Oh, it would be the Carlisle House Historic Park. Absolutely. Absolutely. Because that is where we have seen the most actual physical evidence, like in photographs.
Wow. Well, Katie, I will see you out on one of your haunted tours. Thank you so much for being here.
All right. Thank you, Bridget, so much. It's been a pleasure, and happy spooky season.
You too. Also, y'all, don't go anywhere because in just a moment, we have a sneak peek into a bonus episode coming out later today. This is the third episode out of a 3-episode series from our sponsor, Public Welfare Foundation. In today's episode, 2 leaders, Christy Love and Victor Battle, will talk about what real public safety looks like on the ground and why providing hope for young people is at the heart of every prevention effort. This episode will be dropping later this afternoon, so be sure to check it out.
Recently, I was out at a bar after happy hour, and a gentleman walked up to me and said, "You don't remember me?" And I was looking at his face, and I recognized his face, but I couldn't remember his name. And he was like, while I was at Morca, I helped him get his CDL. He actually started a trucking company and now lives in Hawaii and came back to D.C. on vacation and happened to bump into me. So he introduced me to his wife and was like, this is how it all started. He helped me, encouraged me, helped me get my CDL, and then from there, he just moved forward.
That is all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. And if you enjoyed this spooky show, consider becoming a CityCast DC neighbor, because nothing is scarier than a lack of local journalism. You can do that at membership.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with even more news from around the city. Tune in if you dare.